time we give back. Sow a seed and show someone where love's at. Even if you don't give a dime, give your heart and share your time. Help somebody else in life. Give back. Let's give back.
Hello, my name is Hosea James Gavan II, and welcome to this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform. Today, we're going to take a look at the 2020 presidential election. Here we go. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform. I want to introduce our three guests. We have Mrs. Cheryl Lanfair-Livingston, who is a very dedicated Democratic volunteer supporter in Florida, Broward County. We have Mr. Ronald Powers here in New York City, of ADVIT, community activist, progressive community activist. I know him through our coaching days back in Southeast Queens. And then finally, we have Mr. Alvin Coleman out of DC, an urban patriot, passionate about his country, passionate about his people. I want to welcome you all to our show, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
You know, this is a show that's dedicated to a post-election analysis. We just went through, our country has just gone through, and we're still going through it, okay? So just to give the audience an idea of where we are time-wise, this is November 14th when we're actually taping this particular show. And on this day in DC, we're having rallies in support of President Trump, who, as you should all be aware of by now, has been voted out of office. So I wanted to just start out by asking each of you, what are your thoughts about this particular campaign as it relates to its impact on America today? Starting with you, Cheryl, why don't you give us your ladies first?
This particular campaign, this election was vital for a win for us in terms of saving what we are calling here a democracy. We don't have a true democracy yet, but it's striving and we're always growing. And I think that this was a vital election in order to save what we call our democracy and to keep us moving in the direction that will support our goals and humanity as it stands, the humanity that we know and what we would like to see and envision for our children to keep striving in that direction. I think that had we not won this election, the outcome for us as a community and us as a whole, it would have been a tremendous setback. Tremendous setback.
Okay. I'm going to go to you next, Ron, and then Alvin, you'll follow up on this question.
I agree with Cheryl. I mean, the country was absolutely on a slippery slope. Had the Republicans and their agenda won this election, I mean, life as we know it would have acutely changed. It wouldn't even take a long amount of time. They were well on their way to doing the things they want to do to suppress things like free speech and free assembly. And just symbolically, it would have been like, hate to be so visceral about it, but evil wins. I mean, we were going in the pre-show talking about how we support and we see each other on social media. One of my largest hashtags was the hate won't win. And had the Republicans come out on top of this election, most certainly it would have been hate that would have won. So, I mean, I'm always feeling hopeful. And, you know, I'm always optimistic that we're going to work through this. And just the result of this election and the way that Joe and Kamala ran their campaigns, staying positive, not getting into the gutter with these folks, really shows symbolically, again, that good came out on top. So I'm feeling optimized and energized by the results, but we just have to keep going from here.
Yeah. Alvin?
So Donald Trump ran on a ticket of racism. And that's what his previous 4 years were, attempting to rally white America to the old Jim Crow systems of oppression. So racism is an intensely coercive form of private and public power. And whites control invariably all the land rights, budgetary rights, licenses, patents. They control the government, they control the banks. They control everyone who goes to work's paychecks. And Trump was trying to get them to bond and use that power to effectively crush minorities. Because we live as Black Americans, all of us are born in a place of powerlessness. Majority of us live in communities that are powerless. Majority of Blacks have jobs that render them powerless. And if Trump had been successful in this effort, I think, quite honestly, the next 4 years, you would have seen that effort marshaled on the streets, manifested in the form of legislation. And subsequently, that is the reason this vote was so important, the reason I'm incredibly relieved, impressed by the number of white folks that didn't buy into that mindset of racism and hatred.
So to your point, and I want to touch on something you kind of both alluded to. 'Roughly 73 million, a lot of people that supported Trump. 55% of women his support from white women went up. Sense, right?
From what they said, from 52 to 55.
Right. So, but the point that I want to touch on. Every of those 72 million, they're not racist. Not all of them. I don't believe we have 72 million racist people in this country. I do believe there's a segment of that constituency that is straight up hardcore Confederate flag touting racist, right? But a lot of Trump supporters are scared and are afraid of what's coming. You know, they're not of the mindset of being retrained, right? Because some of those job skills are no longer, and you went from generation to generation in terms of factory types of jobs. I'm more concerned about the great divide in this country right now, and how do we bridge this divide? Because if we look at things from a racial perspective, I don't know if that's going to ever come together, or if it could. I think we got to look at where there's a common interest, and then from that we can see. Because I drove from New York to Dayton, Ohio about 10 years ago, and in driving from New York to Dayton, I'm driving through Pennsylvania, I'm driving through Ohio, and I'm seeing the abandoned factories. I'm also seeing the closed down car dealerships, right? So I'm feeling the depression from that community, and those were not Black communities, right? So touch on that. How do we, considering how divided we are right now as a country politically, is it possible for it to be not so toxic in terms of our differences?
Well, I think that's what we have to concentrate on, more our sameness than our differences. But that's been the goal of this country since Reconstruction. Yeah. I mean, that famous quote that you see now going around that Lyndon Johnson made all those years ago stands true. You know, as you said, some of them are scared, but a lot of them are just simply holding on to that privilege. And I like to call them the I'm not like that. They're not racist, you know, but the way things are pretty damn comfortable for them, so they don't need it to change. It's not going to affect them one iota if it does. Right. So listen, they're not going to work hard to make it change. They're okay where they are. And those are the folks that I think that we need to reach the most.
See, now I push back slightly on, I guess, both assessments of those that voted for Trump, specifically on the matter of privilege, because they're confident, they're comfortable in their skin, and they prefer to not get involved in the absolute obliteration of persons of color. We're all American, but they're so stuck in their privilege, they opt to support a man who demonizes other races, and they know it, but it's funny. And silently they speak amongst themselves and they wax philosophically, I'm glad it's not me. Because they see us being oppressed and they're looking at us like, and they may not be overtly racist, but they do say, wow, that's too bad that's happening. I'm sorry that's happening. But they're comfortable where they are. And that's 70 million people voted for Trump.
Right.
And that's racist.
Alvin, why don't we all, we're gonna have to take a brief public service announcement break at this time. And when we come back, we'll continue this discussion.
I already knew that I was gonna go to college, from a young age. I definitely want to major in political science, become the mayor or something, make the situation better for other people. My name is Justin, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back to this segment of Ignite, Empower, Transform. We are here discussing a post-election analysis of the presidential election that just took place here in the United States. Alvin, you were just talking about the racial dynamic that existed in this, in terms of preserving and maintaining white privilege in this country. I think with the success of a Biden-Harris ticket, the world potentially becomes more competitive, right? Because with that increased competition, as we struggle for limited resources, as was perceived at limited resources at this time, it intensifies the competition, right? So that's where white privilege felt they were entitled to these types of positions, whereas if what he says is true, Blacks, I have your back, you've always had mine, then we're gonna be in a better position to compete for jobs, for contracts. We as a Black community would expect him to honor his word. And as a result, then things become more competitive. That's my analysis.
Okay, so I look at the election like this. Beginning in South Carolina, the Black vote put Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the map. The Black vote took him to the presidency. And so the numbers may bear out that not as many Black men were pivotal in the groundwork, in the grassroots organizing that took Biden to the White House. And if they were pivotal in that effort, then the news would have captured them there. It's just the news wants to know who's doing what. But the most important aspect of Biden and a Kamala Harris ticket is the fact that rather than, in the past we hitched our wagons as Black voters to a liberal ticket that got us give a kid a job programs, charities, that kind of thing, relief programs. This ticket is different. The dialectic today is economic and power and political power, because that's the only thing that America recognizes: wealth, power, influence. And so this ticket is different because the legislations, the programs that they are going to be bringing forward will empower more youth to look toward the sky, more African Americans to not necessarily look for a handout, but extend their hand and be competitive. Because, there's so many deep-seated strategies within our community that divide us. And we struggle with our embrace. So rather than looking for a handout or looking forward to the programs like the welfares and the food stamps, those things, we're now looking for entrepreneurship and a seat at the table. And that's where I see the difference. because everything beyond November 3rd, before November 3rd, white folks controlled everything, everything. And now there's an opportunity for us to fix that. Where we break down in our community is the strategies to do so. So brothers have to do a self-study and just try to fix things with the sisters in our communities. Because it can't be a gender-based question. It has to be a collective. Because as a community, we are still powerless until we have the Senate, the White House, which is now a reality, corporate boardships, and we are dictating legislation and education, because eugenics has done a real head job on us over the last 70 years.
That's the word, young man. That's the word.
So Ron, you know, we were talking offline, and I know one of the major issues that we had to deal with in that was a part of this campaign, the undertone of the racial the racial unrest in this country, right? The protests as a result of police brutality, right? The police using excessive force in just too many instances. So we hear a part of our community saying that how can we appropriate those resources? Because in most municipal governments, the largest share of the budget goes to two places: education and the police force. You want to address that from our perspective? Democratic House seats allegedly were lost because of the association with the defund the police concept.
It seems that, especially with the Democrats, they allow others to shape their narrative for them. I mean, it was never about defunding the police. It was about reappropriating funds and funneling them to the places where maybe they may be better utilized in the community outreach. I know you talked about Alvin, send a kid to school program or after school program, but guess what? Those things were needed. I mean, the robust PAL programs of the 60s and the 70s kept a lot of kids on the straight and narrow, and instead they're out buying paramilitary weapons and, finding new ways for surveillance and things of that nature. And listen, that money can be spent in such a way that those things aren't necessary. As I was admonishing, the woke folks who were talking about how they couldn't support Joel Kamala because of the 94 crime bill. I'm like, listen, folks, if the Republicans weren't allowing cocaine to be funneled into this country at a steady pace rate, we wouldn't have needed the crime bill.
That's it.
You got to see the forest for the trees. And another thing, which you were talking about, Alvin, in terms of entrepreneurship, the Democrats got to get away from this thing of being the working man's party or the working class party, the party of the poor people, the champion of the poor. You speak to a lot of young Republicans, and that's their rationale for affiliating themselves with the Republicans, where the Republicans are about that money. No, those 73 million folks are living in trailer parks and on social assistance at a much higher rate than Black folks are. But that's not the narrative that's accepted about the Republican Party. It's all about that 1% who are the rich and the elite. And that's not the reality of the situation. The Democratic folks who are out here working these jobs, be it blue collar, mid-level management, or even up to, some form of executiveship, the country's been carried on their backs. I mean, the New Yorks pay for the Kentuckys. The Floridas, the Georgias, the northern states that are making the money are paying these folks, and they gerrymandering these districts to allow these folks to kind of like shape the vote to the way they want things to go. And the Democrats are sitting back and not doing too much about it. And I think those are the kind of things that they really need to address.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to interrupt one last time because we have one more public service announcement. And Cheryl, I'm going to have you open up the last segment. There's a question I'm going to pose to the group, and Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to open up the next segment.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
What?
Welcome back to this final segment of Ignite, Empower, Transform. We're having a lively conversation with three very insightful guests. I want to thank you for providing such insightful perspectives. Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to open up this last segment We know we have a very important election coming up on January 5th in Georgia. Let's talk from your perspective, how important that is right now.
I believe the Georgia race, that Senate race, they hold the key. We need the Senate. And without that Senate, it will be very difficult to get legislation pushed through other than by executive order. He will have to do so much executive order. And what we need legislation that's going to stand. I mean, right now, we need the Civil Rights Voting Act. We need for the portion that has been abandoned by the Supreme Court, we need that back. We do not need to go backwards, any farther backwards that we can. So we must deliver the Senate to him. We must deliver that to Kamala. And I even think that going forward into 2024, it will give them the opportunity to show up and to be able to put on the map, pushing the agenda even further and progressing forward in an agenda that is giving power back to the people. So I believe that with the Georgia win, with both of those Senate seats, because we need them both, so that Kamala can break the tie, that doing that will give us the power that we have not had in a very, very long time. So yeah, we've got to get the vote out. Right now, they have to resubmit all the people who voted by absentee ballot. You know, they have to ask for another ballot.
Right.
They have to actually fill out another application, and they should be doing that now.
Right.
We need to be talking and pushing, and of course, you know, do grassroots efforts in making that happen now. Because right now, my two senators are not in Florida. My two senators are in Georgia. They are in Georgia pushing for the Purdue Lafayette through that race. So they're not spending time here. So we've got to make sure that all the time that, and money, they need money because the money is going to be there on the Republican side. But we need to keep pushing. And of course, Stacey Abrams, her Fair Fight agenda is working very hard. And so is LaTosha Brown. She's doing the work there on the ground, pushing that, and along with so many other organizations. But we as a people, I mean, if we really want to get involved as a people, now is our time. There's so much work for us to do that we can do ourselves here. I guess one of the things, and this might be off a little topic, but we can't wait for other people to do things for us. We must all start to do, and we cannot grade what someone else is doing. We must push ourselves more to do more than what we can do. We all have to do that. And that's the only way. We can't wait for someone else to save us.
Right.
We got to start pushing an agenda and getting our agendas pushed through, but we have to start working together in our own way to push through. And this is a true test.
Right.
This is a true test of us.
So to your point, you know, I think one of the things I observed in this past presidential election is the way is being the way the narrative is being presented. And kudos to Black women in terms of how they came out in droves to support the Biden-Harris ticket. But the way it's presented in the media, and I'm going to ask you to touch on this, Ronald. The way this is presented in the media, I see that they as deservingly so, credit Black women for doing so much to making that a reality. And then they talk about the youth vote, and then they talk about Latin women in terms of how their support was instrumental. But what I don't hear, what I've yet to hear, is mention of the 85% of Black men that actually supported that ticket. There's a book by Ralph Ellison called The Invisible Man. That's how I feel right now. Ron, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, but let me start by saying you pretty much stole my intro as opposed to the Invisible Man reference.
Oh, great minds think alike.
Absolutely. But, you know, there's always been a concerted effort by American society to downplay the intelligence of the Black man and kind of like downplay our role in society at large. You know, we are these non-thinking, emotional, and dare I use the word bestial entities, you know, that need to be led around and told what they need to be doing. And there's always been this grandiosity associated with the Black woman, which is well deserved, may I add. All right, Black women are awesome, but you know, there's also a Black family dynamic that has to be taken into account. And Black men are present, they're accounted for. I mean, they're standing up. These narratives about there being more brothers in prison than in college has been debunked so many years ago. These talks about Black men not being present in the family structure has also been debunked by numbers. Black fathers are probably the most participatory around. So, you know, again, we have to start creating our own narrative and have to speak up. But when you're living in a media controlled society and all you hear is that, well, and they had the numbers skewed. They were saying 20% of Black men voted for Trump as opposed to 15. If 85% voted for Biden,
right.
And all those people weren't necessarily supporters of Trump, I think, as much as they may have been detractors of Biden and more pointedly probably Kamala. You know, in some areas of the country, they're just simply Black men who are still chauvinistic, still in that old boy mindset, who don't think women are more qualified to lead, which is probably why Hillary didn't get a lot of the Black male votes as well. You know, but you have to inform yourself and you just have to know what you know and step out there and make the proper vote, you know, not the emotional vote. So I think sometimes, you know, that does come into play somewhat, but 85% is a very large number and
Yes,
it should be counted, it should be recognized.
Absolutely. Well, with that insightful analysis, I want to thank you, Cheryl, Ronald, and Alvin, for joining us for this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform. It has been a lively conversation, insightful conversation, important conversation, and we must continue as a community to have these types of conversations because political empowerment is so vital to our upliftment in this country.
Can I say one more thing before you go?
Yes.
Okay, messaging. The Black community needs messaging, and podcasts like this are the only way to get the message out because we no longer have newspapers. We are not on a network broadcast except for a few MSNBC icons, but messaging. And we have to find a way to promote a community message. Thank you.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Ignite, Empower, Transform. My name is Hosea James Gavan II, and remember, if it's in your heart, do your part. Today's help equals tomorrow's hope. I love our youth. Power to the people.